It's Andra Zaharia here, and I'm delighted to bring you the Cyber Empathy Podcast, where I share stories of kindness, curiosity, and connection that show you how humans shape online security and privacy. I've been in the cybersecurity industry since 2015, and the one thing that I appreciate most about it are the incredibly diverse, curious, empathetic, and crazy smart people in it. They have taught me a lot about myself, about technology, and about all the ways that we can make a meaningful contribution to the world that we live in. I am beyond thrilled to share with you their stories, their passions, their values, and their principles, and most of all, how they lead through example and how they make their work and their passion projects count every single day. I'm super excited to share them with you, and I hope you'll join me and become my partner in cyber empathy. So see you soon. Dario works at the intersection of so many layers of super complex technology that I find it very difficult to wrap my mind around sometimes. So he works in the digital asset space, which is made of cryptocurrencies and things like tokenization and many, many other layers, protocols, and concepts that seem very technically dense. What I found completely refreshing about him and about his work is the sheer amount of empathy that he uses in his conversations, in his work, and in his contribution to the community. Dario has an incredible background in cybersecurity in general, in just the elements that make the backbone of the internet, both up to this point and what might be able to, shape its evolution in the future. So talking to him was just an eye-opening experience simply because he highlighted some of the ways that we can cultivate and use empathy in context where that's never the first thing that you can think about. So I'm very excited to share this conversation with you and to help you see that behind every role, no matter how technical or how maybe mysterious, because you don't know exactly what it means or what it entails, I want to help you see that behind every one of these roles, there's a human that is pouring their passion, their knowledge, but also a lot of themselves into their work to try to help other people, to try to keep things on the right track from an ethical perspective, and to try to contribute through something good to our evolution as a society. So enjoy this episode, and I'll be back with more soon. So Dario, thank you so much for accepting to be a guest on the Cyber Empathy Podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation ever since I got the chance to first speak to you for a separate project. So it's an honor to have you here. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you for the challenge. As I mentioned before, this is a first time for me. So
I appreciate your vote of confidence. And since we're here to talk about empathy, you've been, just to give listeners a quick background, you've been in cybersecurity basically since kind of the field emerged and started to be a thing. And it was nowhere, near of what it is today. And you've seen all of its development stages. You've worked in, a number of roles that gave you not just access, but influence and impact, both in terms of technology and processes and changing people's minds, changing decision makers' minds around some things. So I was wondering, what practicing and encouraging empathy looks like in your specific role at this point.
Empathy, we've spoken about it, and then the listeners will, the way you phrase it, I've been around cybersec, since the beginnings of cybersec. It's, sort of hints at a very, very old person. I was helping to build TCP/IP networks at the transition between X25 and TCP/IP way back in the day. So, I've been around a while, and I've got fairly long-winded and long-winding experience with security, cybersec, network security, and so empathy is something that, in a business context or in a technical context, I have very little experience with directly. But it is something that, when I started to think about this particular conversation, I started to dig into it. And just to remind the listeners and just to remind, our own conversation, or to inform our conversation here, empathy is our ability to engage with one another, right? To perceive to some degree the thoughts and experiences, emotions from the other person, the vis-a-vis. And in a business context, although I don't necessarily talk about being more empathetic with clients or users per se, I do speak increasingly about a win-win situation. So the soft skill is, do you have emotional intelligence? Do you have soft skills to be able to talk with people? But I think, from an IT security perspective, increasingly we're looking at conversations where a win-win is something that engages everyone. The win-win conversation is an important one. What does a user have to win from a conversation? What does the security department have to win from a conversation? So I think packaging empathy as a win-win conversation is maybe something that's very fruitful and useful. Real connections in the workplace, and again, focusing on the role of empathy, real connections, real connectivity between people, it takes time. And I think we somehow forget that in this fast-paced world where we're trying to execute on very tight timelines, where we're trying to introduce new procedures, new policies on very constrained timeframes, we're forgetting that getting things done in an empathetic, in a sustainable fashion, it takes time. I think that's one aspect which we need to highlight. And the other one maybe is that you need a certain amount of resiliency when you're building up these empathetic relationships. You're not always going to get it right. You're not always going to hit upon users who will embrace a new language, a new policy, a new way or method of working. So you need a pretty thick skin. I think the IT security responsibles in companies, by and large, do demonstrate the ability to be resilient, or in layman's terms, to have a thick skin.
That is so true. And I think that there's also another aspect of self-empathy as well, because I feel like there is such immense pressure on IT and security roles and people in IT and security roles, from, the like entry level to the highest, most senior roles there are in the industry. And having that ability to cultivate self-empathy and to realize that this is a line of work where you can never know everything, and where, having like a low ego or no ego approach is sometimes a much more productive way of approaching things, and opens up communication channels to build the relationships that you were talking about. I think that that's also an important aspect to consider. And thank you for speaking on that, because I believe that with that win-win approach in mind, you're prioritizing benefits for the other person as well, or for the other team that you're talking to. That always changes perspective, that forces you to think differently. It's just like setting up a website and not talking about what we do, but how we're serving you as a customer. And that kind of explains that we already understand the pain points. And there's so much more depth to that we could, capture right now. But I felt I wanted to add that example. You work at the intersection of digital assets and information security, which adds the entire Venn diagram of these two things, adds layers and layers of abstraction, and it kind of reduces the number of people, the pool of people who actually get what this is about, and, the role they have, the role digital assets have in this transformation that we're going through. So what role does empathy play in making these concepts not just work on a technological level, but also work in terms of human understanding? Because I feel that the conversation may feel restrictive for most people, including myself. I still have trouble wrapping my head around, digital assets and the security challenges they pose. So how do you think, empathy could help make that conversation more accessible and more comfortable, especially for business decision makers, since there's the ones that have to make all these choices at the moment?
It's a great question. And it is, by and large, I think an unsolved niche to the cybersecurity digital asset management space somehow. In recent many years, it's become more popularly well understood that, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Yeah, so that's become a mantra, which I think is now entered into broader mass consciousness. And there's a lot of truth to that, I think. But it's the way I've always understood it, and it wasn't from the beginning, but I did grow into this understanding, is that the importance of a Bitcoin thing, right? This digital thing that can somehow be transmitted and has value when you receive it, and I no longer have control of it. The understanding of what that implies is really not well understood in the market, and certainly not well understood in the upper echelons of business. When I get asked, why is Bitcoin so important? I think, what many people expect is, the price is going up. It's got a lot of value and stuff. But the way I always understood Bitcoin is that we all understand, I think, intrinsically what a bearer asset is. If I give you a dollar note or a 10 franc or a 20 franc note, and you have it and I no longer have it, it's very clear that you have control and that you possess something. Digital assets, right? For your audience, they'll understand well what digital assets are, because when you're building websites or building systems, digital assets are just those things, those files, those pictures, those audio files that exist. And you can transmit them, but you can't give any guarantees about control or ownership. And for me, Bitcoin was and is, foundationally important because it's the world's first, it's not the only one anymore, but it's the world's first digital bearer asset. So when I transmit it to you, the network cryptographically, mathematically confirms and ensures that you have control over this digital thing and I no longer have control. And that very foundational concept, I think, is super important to understand. Bitcoin, first digital bearer asset. Now, what you can use it for, at the moment, it's turned out that it's pretty good for transmitting value and having some sort of monetary connection to it, but it could be used for a lot of other things, and then we're starting to play with ID management, using blockchain, using digital bearer assets, using some sort of timestamps on the chain. And all these concepts are super important. I don't want to say that they're complex, but they are not, something that the majority of people would understand. So how do you reduce that complexity, right, from this new digital thing, which can do a lot? How do you reduce the complexity, and how do you communicate the value, the potentialities of it to quote unquote normal people? I don't have a great solution to that. What I can say, though, is that when you're looking at wallets that hold digital assets, they all suck. They've got QR codes, they've got long addresses, which are incomprehensible. There's language around confirmation time. If you wait 5 minutes, has your money left and been received or not? And over the past many years that I've been in the space, the wallet interface really hasn't improved. And so then I start to think about, what are some of the missing pieces? And this is where, our conversation on empathy sort of, caught my ear and caught my imagination a little bit. And that's, many, many years ago. So I'll take a half a step back. A long time ago, when the internet and the web were starting to sort of nudge themselves into public consciousness, we started talking about digital agents, kind of a digital butler that runs around the network and does stuff for you. So if you decide that you want to read up on a certain subject matter, then this digital piece of, whatever would go out and just grab information from you and then serve it up to you on a daily basis. And this idea of a digital agent is something which I think is comprehensible. We have not yet approached it, but I can see that digital agents that act on our behalf will be very important to how digital asset management and security around digital assets goes forward and has a role going forward. I can imagine that my bank's debit card, which holds in the near future, hopefully, a bit of crypto, a bit of Bitcoin, my mobile wallet on my laptop, all these different expressions of me and my digital wealth and my digital identity, they should all be able to collaborate with one another in order to produce results that benefit me. And I think that sort of facility, that sort of digital agent out in the world that is empathetically trying to do the best that it can as a piece of software for me, this situation is, I think, important. Who's going to write that code? Companies that are looking for a win-win in terms of a win for the client to make his world more convenient, which should help a lot as far as bringing a more empathetic basis to the discussion. So this win-win, this convenience factor, I think is an important part of it. And just to close the loop back on how cybersecurity professionals maybe look at this, when they're looking at introducing policies into organizations, I start to hear a lot these days about training and how training should be more personally focused, more personally centric, and how the motivations of the user should be aligned to the motivations of the organization, so that there shouldn't be a policy which the user feels is a waste of time. And if you can align the policies, and if you can align the outcomes, and if you can make this stuff more convenient, more bite-sized, so that the user aligns himself with security, I think the users will endeavor to do the more secure, the more personally beneficial thing. And this also has, of course, an implication on digital asset space, because we do personally have to take more responsibility for our digital presence, for our digital identity, and for our digital wealth in the days going forward, in time going forward.
I think you brought a lot of clarity to a very, very complex and very technically dense topic. So I really appreciate that. And it's not just that, but you also highlighted some examples and some gaps in the, let's say, market and in the workflow and the ecosystem that definitely require, more people to pay attention to them and to get personally involved in trying to figure out what these solutions and these improvements look like in real life. And the fact that you mentioned, using relatable examples and being mindful of the language that we use to set expectations for people who are just now interacting for the first time with digital assets, or interacting more and more with security policies and all sorts of concepts that are, honestly speaking, foreign to them, because that concept of echo chamber keeps coming up whenever we have conversations and we try to get outside of the industry to talk to people who have no relation or who aren't at all familiar with even the most basic security concepts, which is fine. And it happens a lot and it's a reality. And getting through that echo chamber and actually, helping people become comfortable with these terms and what they mean and what their impact is on their work and their own digital identity, I think is a step in helping them just have more control and more self-confidence that they can work with these concepts in a way that helps them and improves their perspective and their understanding of what's going on in the world. Because honestly, I feel, and this is kind of one of the main reasons we're having these conversations that I actually started, this podcast, is that I feel that cybersecurity education is fundamental to us retaining, let's say, critical thinking and improving it, and also retaining our mental clarity and our ability to navigate the world as it progresses far beyond our biological capabilities of actually processing information and doing something with it as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just, you spotted on two topics which are super important. The one is, we as biological, right, as humans, we have a fire hose of information in our hands, in our mobile phones, and we're confronted with information which is really beyond our capacity to deal with. I have a great deal of sympathy for colleagues in larger financial institutions that I've been in that are asked, to change their passwords on some sort of schedule, or to keep, their passwords very strong, or to be on guard for phishing emails that might come from outside. And when you work for a bank, these tasks are not optional. They're things that you have to be on guard for. But I have a great deal of sympathy for individuals that they just don't have time. Their work requirements are very high. The information flow is very large, and the time to get stuff done is very short. And you put that all together, and then on top of that, the IT department comes and says, and these are the constraints that you still have to keep in mind, and this is the training that we're going to give you, which has been historically very boring. It's been mandatory, but it's been very boring. And so anything that can be done to improve the training, I think will be a huge win, because I think training and education, at least in my day, it was the most cost-effective way, the most cost-efficient way to improve a company's cybersecurity posture, was just by ensuring that everyone was better trained.
Yeah, because it developed that shared vocabulary and those shared experiences that we really feel, not just understand, but feel on an emotional level. Since we were talking about, this shared vocabulary and these, let's say, symbols of trust that we can integrate into our lives, could you share examples of what cybersecurity looks like when it builds on empathy? Something that came to mind as I was listening to you and speaking your experience with protocols and everything else is that, seeing that green or whatever golden, but seeing that green lock in your browser and knowing that your connection is encrypted, even without knowing what encryption is, it gives you that sense of security and it helps anchor that symbol. It helps bring it closer and make it familiar and make it reliable. Are there any such other examples that you can think of, that show that this is a simple way to present security to a user who doesn't have any background in technology or security, but still feels familiar and safe and it puts them, in control of their actions, hopefully?
I wish I had examples. I don't. The one that comes to mind, and this is, I don't, because it's not my daily grind, but something that's come up in recent times that I've taken note of is that when I'm in a browser, in particular Chrome, but it doesn't have to be just Chrome. But if I'm in a browser and I'm hitting a couple of different email accounts through the browser is now starting to ask me if I want to sort of carve it out into a separate space. And the separate space has a distinct color to it. So now I'm able to, on my work laptop, to be able to deal with my work emails, and that's space A, and my private emails, and that has a distinct color in space B. And it's all within the browser. And I was quite surprised that Google had come up with that notion. But it is useful because it helps me to separate work and private within the same desktop. And so I found that to be very useful.
Anything that builds awareness, I think, it is incredibly important. Any change that makes us mindful of our habits like this and puts us in a certain mental space that makes us, either more aware of the fact that we need to particularly protect that specific activity, such as online banking. I also enjoy, Gmail's feature where it tells you that this is a new email address. You've never talked to this person before. This person is
Absolutely.
External to your organization. Are you sure you want to email them? All of those things and flags are very important. And it is a big way in which technology can contribute to building safer habits and teaching people the value of these kind of micro reactions, which otherwise we just go through on autopilot, simply because autopilot is a way to survive in the world, a very complex world that we've been talking about. I deeply value, the fact that you lend your time and your expertise and your experience to this conversation, which I'm very much looking forward to share with others. Is there a specific, let's say, set of resources that they could follow if they want to just enhance their understanding of, digital assets and security and how these things come together to hopefully, advance their own education on the topic?
Well, first of all, so thank you, Andrew. It was a pleasure, a bit of fun, I have to say, to talk about something which is not 100% part of my daily grind. So it's been a pleasure. As far as being able to follow me, I'm not broadly speaking a public figure. I'm on Twitter. So for those that are interested in learning about digital assets and getting some level of deeper technical and also social or economic perspective on that, I use Twitter almost exclusively as my source of truth for all things related to Bitcoin and crypto. I go to conferences as well, but if you check out I'm not proposing to follow me on Twitter, but if you go to my Twitter, find me at Dario UTXO, and check out, who I follow. That'll give you a pretty good sense for the market. These days, I've been putting my nose into traders and how the NFT markets are working. So there's a bit of new scams that are popping up. But otherwise, it's a good source. And otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. My channels are open. If you've got questions, I'd love to help.
Thank you so much. That's very generous of you. It was lovely to discover new ways of practicing empathy and cybersecurity with you today. Explore the podcast for more stories about connection, for more inspiring ideas, and for more people who drive online security and privacy forward. It's a great chance to learn from them how to improve your own practice of empathy, both in keeping yourself safe online, but also far beyond that. You can find all of the episodes on andrazaharia.com, plus a bunch of resources that come with each episode, and lots more articles and guides that could help you along the way. Lovely seeing you here, and be sure to reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn if you have any ideas or want to propose any new guests. See you around.